Yes, I think it is a very counter-natural, a very unnatural activity. And when one starts doing philosophy, I mean, well, I notice this, of course, in teaching philosophy, that people are very reluctant to play this game or cannot see how it's done at all to begin with, because it involves a very odd sort of standpoint. It's notoriously difficult to define philosophy, of course. If somebody doesn't know what this activity is, it's very difficult to say what it is. It's to do with conceptual structures, to do with very deep structures of belief and knowledge. It's to do with meaning, significance. It's partly, of course, to do with words, in the sense that it's about how language relates to the world and that sort of thing. And it's not science, and it's not art, and it's very important that it's not science, I think, don't you think? I mean, that as soon as you start doing science, you're falling right out of philosophy. It's a kind of point of view which, although the style may be scientific, the actual, what you're doing is certainly not science. It's a kind of a reflection on concepts.
Yes, well, Bertrand Russell once said that it's the questions that we don't know how to answer, and I think Isaiah Berlin and other well-known contemporary philosophers also take this view.
And it means looking at things which one takes for granted and suddenly seeing that they're very, very odd indeed.
Yes. But the one thing that philosophy does have in common with science, I think, is that it's based on an attempt to understand the world and to understand our environment and to understand our situation in a way that doesn't consist just of expressing personal attitudes and personal views. There is an attempt to, as it were, submit oneself, and this was implicit in something you said just now, I think, to submit oneself to criteria outside oneself. In other words, you're trying to say something that is impersonally true.
Yes, yes.
And you said just now, I think, when you were talking about the way you yourself write, you said that, and it's absolutely true, that your novel writing has a very distinctive literary personality, whereas I think you said you wouldn't mind if your philosophical writing was thought not to have any personality. Now, it strikes me that almost the most important thing about an imaginative or creative writer is this possession of a literary personality. If he hasn't got a distinctive personality in that sense, we're not interested in reading it. Whereas with philosophers, it just isn't the case. I mean, you could read all the works of Kant with great care and interest, and at the end of it have no idea what Kant was like as a human being.
Yes, of course, literature is various in this respect, isn't it? That some people have a distinctive style, other people don't. I suppose it is self-expression in a way by definition. I mean, that unless you wanted to express yourself, if you didn't have this motive, you would lack a very important motive towards this form of art. Whereas philosophy is certainly not self-expression. And philosophy, of course, is argument. And you can say, well, is the conclusion true, or is the argument valid?
I found, when talking to friends of mine who may be very intelligent and very well educated but don't know much about philosophy, I find they often express the assumption that philosophy is a branch of literature, that a philosopher is somehow expressing a personal view of the world in the way that a poet might be or a novelist might be. And it's not always easy to explain briefly why this is not so. I suppose it's partly because these problems, philosophical problems, have histories. And each individual philosopher comes on the scene at some stage in that developing history. And if he makes a contribution at all, it's rather like the scientist. He makes it at that stage. Otherwise, there isn't one to be made, so to speak.
Yes, philosophy is the history of philosophy in the sense that there is a development in the problems, and philosophy lives on philosophy very much more than art lives on art.
Yes. And I think the writing of art, the writing of novels and poems, engages very much more of the personality, both of the writer and the reader, actually, than philosophy does. Philosophy is a much more narrowly intellectual activity. In fact, I'd go farther. I'd say that literature, to be literature at all, must move one emotionally, whereas the philosopher, like the scientist, is actually trying to exclude emotional appeal, isn't he, from his work?
Yes, literature could be said to be a sort of disciplined technique for arousing certain emotions. That's certainly one of its one of the reasons why one enjoys it, and one of the reasons perhaps why it's both good for us when it's good and bad for us when it's bad.
Well, we've been talking about the differences, and I think it's very important that we should stress these differences. But there are also some things in common, aren't there? I mean, I know from previous conversations with you, for example, that you think that some notion of truth, though they may be different notions of truth, are very near the centre of both.
Yes. I certainly hold a particular view on the subject of what art is like and what literature is like, and this view, which wouldn't be shared by everybody by any means, would assimilate philosophy and literature just in that way. That is, I think that this may be perhaps the only important thing they have in common, but it is important that they're both connected with truth, that they're truth-seeking, truth-revealing activities in some sense, and they're both, I mean, it's always illuminating in a particular thought form to say, well, how is it criticized? What kind of critical vocabulary is directed against it? And I think that the question of truthfulness comes into criticism of literature as well as criticism of philosophy.
Could you say a little more about this? Because I think this is particularly interesting.
Well, that if one thinks of the kinds of things that we say about literature from a critical point of view, we often condemn it for being sentimental or for being fantastic in a bad sense. I mean, let's establish, say, a contrast between imagination and fantasy, with imagination being thought of as a good creative power, and fantasy as a sort of private self-consolation, so that fantasy is bad, imagination is good. I think both philosopher and writer have to face a conflict between imagination and fantasy in themselves. That, of course, philosophy is an imaginative activity, and if one thinks of the great philosophers, they're very often picture makers. They're people who produce enormous metaphors and pictures to explain things. And the intrusion of any kind of personal fantasy is obviously out of place there. But I think it's even greater a conflict for the writer, because creative imagination and personal fantasy are awfully close in relation to fiction. I mean, the obvious sort of example is the case of the novel, which the bad novel, which turns out to be simply a fantasy of how the hero, who's the writer, triumphs over all his enemies and is loved by the girls and so on, yes, and becomes rich and so forth. And this kind of fantasy is a menace to the creative imagination. And in condemning art for being fantastic in this sense, one's very close to saying that it's untrue, that it's saying something which isn't true.
Now, that conception of truth, though, is different, isn't it, from what the philosopher is trying to get at, is it not?
Well, the philosopher is dealing with truth in a kind of positive sense, in that he's trying to solve certain problems finally. Whether he ever does is another question, but I think there are certain philosophical problems, for instance, about perception, which perhaps have been solved. The writer has a whole lot of aims. I mean, this is what, of course, makes art so interesting, that it satisfies a great many human activities and instincts. It produces happiness in the creator and in the client through doing a whole lot of things at the same time. But one of the things it does, and this is, I think, is important and comes up in philosophical theories about art, which perhaps we might consider in a minute, there is, I think, a mimetic aspect.
What do you mean by
literature.
mimetic?
That is, that it is imitation of nature, in some sense, that literature is about the world. This might seem to be obvious, but of course it isn't obvious, in the sense that a lot of people would challenge this remark and say that literary art is not mimetic. The same kind of question, of course, can be asked about painting. Music is an odd man out, I think, in this particular discussion. But I think that there are many parallels between painting and literature, and these are sometimes illuminating. You can see something more clearly, perhaps, in the case of painting, which you then can transfer, as it were, to the case of literature.